I don't like Godzilla movies. I know, weird way to start a story, right? It seems so out of field for that kind of stuff to find on websites, like the ones I'm posting this on. Most people would start off their stories with some kind of description of how they got in a mess that they're on, or in, or some obnoxious warning. But all I got is the fact that I don't like movies. About a radioactive dinosaur smashing cities. It's dumb, I know. See, the appeal of monster movies, if I had to describe it, it is how impossible people think they are. According to the accepted scientific law, animals that big simply can't exist on land because they'd collapse under their own weight. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said that once. Something around those lines, I don't know. I'm not that big on science. Never managed anything more than a passing grade in the subject in any school. But what I do know is that these people are full of shit. And I'm about to explain why. I remember the whole incident pretty vividly for something that happened. I don't know 2 or 3 years ago. The actual date is kind of fuzzy. Though if I had to date, I wouldn't give it out. I'm not going to tell you where this happened either. But I'll describe the location as vaguely as I can manage without making it pointless. I live in a small rural town. It gets really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter. And ever since 1924, we've had 10-minute earthquakes every 10 years. And it's just kind of an accepted fact at the place point, residents like to joke and call it Shakesville. So we call that for now. Anyone who lives there will know what I'm talking about. And for your sake, not everyone's, do not say anything about where Shakesville is, actually. Anyways, I have lived in Shakesville my entire life. I was born the day after these earthquakes, and we've been never left since. Aside from the odd vacation, it's a pretty nice place in all honesty. I have a job working 9 to 5 at the local grocery store, pay my bills, and just generally make a decent living. I'm not some massively creative person by any means. I just do what I needed to do to get by and remain content with everything I've got. But I've always wondered about cause these earthquakes. I'm sure anyone who's been in this town for more than 10 years has wondered in that fact. No, I know it. We'd always talk about it after school, because we had this weird feeling that it wasn't something natural. After all, they've always happened to be on the same date, at the same time of day, and lasted for the same amount of time. Some kid named Jimmy, he was the weird one. He always said that it because there was something beneath the earth, a species of moat people that burrowed under the earth every 10 years or something like that. We laughed it off. It sounded like ridiculous. Looking back, I almost wished it had been that simple. It's happened 3 times in my life. These quakes, I mean, once when I was 9 years old, once I was 19, and once I was 29. And the time I was 19, I made a decision. I'd use the money I got from working at the local burger joint to get some equipment to figure out where the epic center of this earthquakes was. I got a ruler, a high quality compass, and a printer and some paper, and a beefy calculator, and I got to work. I watched the clock intently. A guide written by the undergraduate study geology lists the following instructions, and these are the ones that I followed for those who are curious. 1. Measure the time that the elapses between the arrival of the primary wave, P, and the arrival of the secondary wave, S, for significant stations. Using the SP time, determine on how the epicentral distance of each station to the quake, causing the travel time curve. Use a map of geographical compass to draw across the radii equal the amount of epicentral distances around each station. Where these arcs overlap, you may approximate your epicenter. I didn't manage to precise the measurement. Maybe it was because I only had 10 minutes to do it. Or maybe it was because it was my first time. Or maybe the instructions were bad. I don't know. I'm no geologist, but I do get a general direction. And the next day, I called in sick and got some supplies, and walked into that direction out of town and into the woods surrounding it. I had gotten foresight to time to my walk, 5 hours there and back in total. When you work at any kind of restaurant, you get used to standing on your feet all day. And looking back, I'm incredibly grateful for this, because I don't know if I could have made it all the way out there if I wasn't used to being on my feet like 24/7. But after 2.5 hours about it, I broke through the trees and found the weirdest thing I had ever seen up to this point. It was some sort of rock formation in the middle of some kind of the clearing. It was huge, like it was so big that it could have been mistaken for a football stadium from really high up. I didn't even bother trying to walk around it, but something didn't seem right about it. For one thing, it was made of a bunch of jagged rocks that looked like canines. You know, the little fangs everyone has upper and lower jaw of their teeth. Run your tongue across your teeth, and if you feel the little fangs, then that's them. Some looked chipped, others didn't, but they looked arranged into a circle, or maybe an oval. The way they were angled gave me the impression it could either look or... But the weirdest part is when I went over to it and managed to get a peek between them, all I saw was a hole. By this point, I had decided that it was something to do with these rocks. Specifically that was confusing to me. I made a personal note to come back here every few hours before the quakes happened again in 10 years, and then I went home. Things just kinda went along as normal. The 10 years in between them, with the next quakes, I quit my job and found a new one. Got hooked up with the girl I knew from high school. Broke up with her after I caught her cheating on me. Moved into a house I own today, and every passing day inched me closer to it. I have to admit it, I was kind of excited. I started off by having these fantasies of showing my recordings to some scientists and becoming more massively popular. This world-renowned guy who had uncovered the mystery of the Shakespeare quakes. Finally, the big day arrived. After calling in sick and packing my equipment, a camcorder, a tripod, a long chair, and some sodas and snacks just in case I got hungry or thirsty, I chose to take my car at that time, drive it out to the location, parking my car out there and getting everything set up. I started with the camcorder, getting it to recording, and it had enough battery life to last 10 hours. It got the quakes due to its start one. I stood in front, give my name and exact time, stated my intent and just to it, to make sure it was all set up correctly and that I get the full picture. Then I set up my chair and waited. 50 minutes passed, and then I thought that I heard something. Something like a distant movement. Something hard scraping against the dirt. I got steadily closer and closer until I physically felt like moving beneath my feet. But it wasn't the exact time for earthquakes to start, which had left me more baffled than anything else. Of course, I quickly realized that what was happening. Something was moving underground, and causing a smaller, more localized quake. My mind briefly wandered back to that kid, Jimmy, and his idea of mole people. When the shark-tooth-like rocks shuddered, and what came out of the hole, they surrounded physically and froze to me by my chair in sheer and unadulterated horror. I felt myself shaking horribly, yet I couldn't voluntarily move a single muscle. It looked like some sort of gigantic worm. Its body was pitch black in terms of color. It didn't suck up any light. It was just a very dark in color. It did a glint under the sunlight, which allowed me to make out the details. It scarred and battered the exoskeleton, as long as the yellow tusks coming out from its lower jaw. Its segmented body curling as it rose out of the hole underneath the earth. It had a single bulging eye embedded in its head, and 3 nostrils between that and its mouth. And coming out of either side of its body were the arms, and they were fairly thick and lithe compared to the worm. Given the expression, it was quite physically strong. Each arm was adorned with 3 fingered hands, and the worm claws extending from each finger. It didn't have any thumbs. Looking back, they were probably meant for scraping through the dirt, more than grabbing the things. Long sharp fins rose out of its back, going down entire length that I saw. That thing was massive. I have no doubts that I would have zero trouble wrapping that around that Empire State Building if it wanted. And it could possibly dwarf the whole thing if it was raised up, as high as it could. It cast a massive shadow, though, upon the ground around it, and its gaze was focusedly squarely upon the sky. It braced itself against the rock formations, which makes me think of the trouble standing upright. Its entire low jaw vertically down the middle, and it drew behind its back, and taking a breath for a solid 5 minutes. So the air was pulled in, and I felt myself becoming short out of breath. So I breathed in myself and waited it out. The first thing I did was I didn't just sitting there and staring at utter horror. It stopped, and it held its breath for another minute, then thrust its head forward, and came out was a roar that was simultaneously the loudest thing I've ever heard, and the quietest. I know now where the quakes come from. Its thing is this thing, the emerging thing beneath the earth for every 10 years, unleashing this terrible shout for 10 minutes straight. And it's so loud that the quakes in the ground during the whole duration, yet it's so high-pitched that you could strain your ears upon hearing it. But once you pick it up, it becomes more reflexive, and you are able to hear without trying. It was a very unpleasant sound either. The noise was very dreadful in every capacity, sounding like every dying squeal you ever heard from an animal meshed together, and pitched up so far you can't hear it. It strikes me as good as after every few years. I still remember it so vividly. I guess it's just one of those things you can't forget. After totally 10 minutes, it stopped. It very slowly blinked, its eyelids closing vertically rather than horizontally, like you or me would. And it's turned its head, and I realized now that it was there. It moved its claw to the rock formations and bent over, panting on the ground, supporting its weight, and then it did another with the claw. It pulled itself forward towards me, twisted its head in 180 degrees clockwise to angle the eye at the ground, and lowered its head over me and stared down for what felt like hours, though looking at the footage, it was just a couple of minutes. I've never been so convinced that I was going to die right then and there. That horrible thing from right out of the monster film was going to eat me or squash me or even breathe a little bit too hard and break all my bones. If I ran, I would most likely certainly die, so I stayed put, hoping and praying to God whatever it existed that thing would decide to spare me. It eventually began to go back, rotating its head in default position, and used its claws to push itself back towards the hole. It climbed back in, and once more using its claws to brace itself against the formations. It gave another roar of the same length as it did, and slipped back under the surface to return to whatever pit called home. I sat there for an hour or so, as I regained my ability to move. Once I did, I very shakily got up and turned off the camcorder, got everything it packed up, wolfed down some snacks, and then went home. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I just witnessed something horrible. Something I couldn't forget if I tried. I attended to call my local church the next morning. I have never been a religious fellow, but I needed to feel there was someone out there better than that thing. Something that could give me an ounce of security. It didn't kill me. For some reason I was still alive, but I thought of it some kind of damage it could do if it ever got the reason to get on some horrible rampage. Haunted me for months later, and it hasn't quite left my mind. Of course, the townsfolk seemed to be shaken as well. Two quakes instead of one. They were baffled, somewhat concerned, and they saw me just literally assume I was the worst off of them of the same thing. Apparently, some accidents happened during the second roar. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but it left some people with jittery. I refused to release the tapes or even say exactly where I found it. Heck, this is the first time I've ever mentioned it to anyone besides myself. But if somehow you know where it is, then do yourself a favor and listen to me. Tell no one, because if the word gets out, I'll create a panic, and if there's a panic, the military is going to get involved, and they're going to try and kill it. And to anyone who's watched this giant monster films, know exactly what will follow. You want to know the reason why I don't like Godzilla love films these days? It's because it reminds me of what could actually happen. And that, my little pretties, was The Beast from Below, a creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? Well, I'm gonna be completely honest when I say this is I know a few stories such as just this one. I mean, this story from what I found out was written by GoGoRobzilla. Robzilla. So sorry about that. Yeah. I mean, this is actually a very messed up story. Like, basically what happens is, earthquakes happen, every 10 years at this one town, and this protagonist decides to go and figure out what's causing the earthquakes. So when the protagonist goes to find out what causes the earthquakes, the unfortunate happens, which he or she, for that matter, ends up, well, it's a he. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to say that. But he ends up finding this creature or something, and it ends up attacking, well, not really attacking like a monster movie or something, but it ends up going over to attack, well, basically makes this loud roar and causes the earthquake. And when this thing ever did, I mean, the description of what the creature worm thing actually looked like, I mean, that's kind of terrifying, to be honest. I mean, I would be terrified, and I'd probably piss myself if I ever were to see that thing, no doubt. I mean, that's pretty creepy. And I can understand why this protagonist didn't like the Godzilla pasta. And I mean, granted, I haven't watched Godzilla in a long time, so I don't really remember much of it, because it's been a couple years since I last saw Godzilla, any of the Godzilla movies. I mean, I haven't watched Godzilla in a while. I think the last time I watched it was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago or something. I mean, I thought it was pretty interesting. The good thing I like about this story was the description of the story, about how depth and detailed that the protagonist went out. Now, this is an older story. I think this was written 2000 I don't know, 2018 or 2019 teen, so it's not a very super old story how I would think it would be a super old story, but this story, on the other hand, was actually pretty good for what it is. I mean, the description of it was pretty well done in detail, as well as the grammar. I mean, I love how well the grammar is. Like, the grammar is really well done and made. Same thing with the sentence structuring, the storyline. I mean, about the becoming a monster, like, I could honestly see that maybe being like an urban legend or something, but yet again, that's just me. But yeah, I mean, I've heard a couple other narrators narrate this, such as What Do You Fear, Dark Owl Stories, Buffy Reads. I also heard of As the Raven Dreams narrated this story, and it's a pretty good one in my opinion as well. I mean, Mountain Eye's narrations also took a narration of this, so yeah, now, as the Raven Dreams, I want to give him or her a shout out because, it's a pretty good story for what this is. And I know this individual actually, started narrated this story like a few like not too long ago actually. I think yeah. I think it was he this person narrated about 9 months ago actually, and it's a pretty good story. So, anyways, with that being the case, and with that being said, I'm going to sit here and basically say this right now. pretty good story for what it is. It does have a good explanation. It's a pretty interesting concept for the story. I do like it. I mean, it being a monster, I think that might be a bit hard to believe of the monster causing earthquakes. If it's pretty much an urban legend from what I can see personally. I could see this more of an urban legend, but you guys might have, might agree with me on that. I mean, if you don't, that's fine cuz I respect, your beliefs on it. So, yeah. I mean, this story was actually not a bad story. Pretty good for what it is. It does have, pretty good grammar in that. And I actually found this on, it's from the regular creepypasta wikis, so I can see this being a pretty interesting story for what this is. I mean, yeah. I know I kind of repeated myself a few times, but anyways, I'm going to sit here and say this. Like I'm gonna say, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story would have to be a 10 out of 10. It was a pretty good story. Very good, well made. It was definitely time and effort. There was definitely a lot of that being put into the story. I do like how, it was well made. I mean, it's a pretty good story if it was an urban legend. And I can honestly see this being an urban legend because of the worm thing. I mean, I think that monster thing could be, more of an urban legend because it's kind of really hard to believe in a sense if if that was the case. But anyways, what did you guys think about this story? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.